maybe just about a minute, but not too long, because I do want us to start pretty close to on time. Let's begin. This is going to be a webinar about the Nonprofit Recovery Program, American Rescue Plan Act, for the grant that's upcoming. My name is Melissa Cerrone, and I am the program manager for the Office of Arts and Culture. So I want to thank everybody for attending. We have our colleagues with us here today, Diana Rufner and April Rice, who you've probably met. She's probably contacted you, I hope, and maybe sent you some information. So she's definitely going to be a good contact for this grant. And also our creative economy manager, Jason Jong, is here today. But so we're just going to go over the application. We're going to go over the guidelines for the final round of ARPA nonprofit grants. And I'm going to spend a lot of time specifically covering eligibility. This session is in a webinar format, so we'd appreciate it if you put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try to answer all of them for you. I will stop periodically to answer your questions as we go. Some questions will probably be clarified as we move along, and specifically as we actually open the application and take a look at it at the end. So you might want to hold your questions, or things might become apparent as we move along. And the webinar is also being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel. It's the Office of Arts and Culture, Sacramento Office of Arts and Culture YouTube channel. And it's usually available about 2 days for sure afterwards. It may be up in a day, but for certainly within 2 days, so you can take a look at it. I do encourage everybody to stay on the webinar if they can. I think listening to it live, being able to ask questions that are specific to you can be really valuable. You may watch the webinar and still have more questions, and it just may trigger something. So if you can stay today, that would be terrific. Also, I would like to apologize. I do have a cold, and I think I should be able to get through this pretty well, but hopefully I'm not too hard to hear and understand. So the agenda, I'm just going to go very briefly. I always like to say who we are, about the Office of Arts and Culture, and give you a little information about us, particularly if you're new to our programs and you've not worked with us before, to talk to you a little bit about the ARPA program and what it really means. And then we're going to really dig into the guidelines, which means we're going to look at eligible activities for the grant. We're going to look at eligible organizations. So what makes you eligible? We're going to also look at what would make you ineligible. There are certain types of organizations that unfortunately can't apply for this particular grant opportunity. We'll talk a little bit about the documentation that's going to be required. We'll go over very simply the dates and deadlines that we have for the grant. And then I'll take you into how the awards are determined and what the contracting process is like. And then we're going to spend some time actually going through the grant application. I find that's usually helpful because there may be questions that you're really not sure how to answer, and we can probably be a little bit more specific. And definitely leave time for questions and answers. I will be here as long as you need to answer questions. And if there's something that we can't answer here today, something that we might need to go into more detail, I would encourage you to reach out to our office. We are here and available. Particularly April and I will be available to answer questions. And we also have, and it will be in the webinar, an email address that you can get an answer from anybody as soon as you need it. So first, just telling you a little bit about the Office of Arts and Culture. For those of you that maybe worked with us in the past, we were known as the Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission, or SMAC. But in 2018, we went through a transfer, and we are now an Office of City Government, and we're the Office of Arts and Culture. And we are part of the Department of Convention and Cultural Services. So that's the bigger department, and we're the division. An important thing to note is we are the state and local partner for Sacramento County. And why that's important specifically for this program is that there are opportunities that are funded that are for the entire county. Again, because we're an office of city government, often what we do and what we support are just programs that are in the city of Sacramento because we use city funds for those. But for other programs, we like our Cultural Arts Awards and this specific ARPA grant for nonprofit organizations, we access county funds, which means we're pretty excited we get to fund throughout the county, and organizations that don't often get to apply for one of our grants can apply under this program. I also like to point everyone to the Creative Edge Cultural Plan. Again, back in 2018, we did a cultural plan for the office. A lot of those things have been accomplished, but if you have an opportunity at some time, I'd love for you to go onto our website, take a look at our cultural plan, because the cultural plan really outlines a lot of the programs, the directions that we hope to go in as an Office of Arts and Culture. It's kind of our North Star for what we do. And it's a great document to familiarize yourself with so that you understand what role we want to play in the community. We provide programs, grants, and investments in the entire creative economy. So this program here specifically is for nonprofit organizations, but we're going to have other programs, and we periodically have other programs and other opportunities that are for creative businesses, for individual artists, that can run the gamut and be a little bit more broad. So again, if you find out that this program isn't for you, please continue to check in with us, because we're going to have other opportunities that might be better suited for you. And then finally, what we're doing right now is administering $10 million in relief funds. And these are government funds. They come from the federal government, get passed down to the city, and the city has allotted them for our purposes. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about ARPA, and I just want to clarify what that is. It's an acronym that we use, and it's referring to the Federal American Rescue Plan Act that made government funds available for recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our allocation in the city, we're really excited that out of the city funds that were allocated to the city of Sacramento, $10 million of those go directly to the creative economy. So that's a pretty big chunk of funds that are really helping the relief efforts from COVID-19 for creative economy businesses and nonprofits. In this case, we had $2 million of funds from the city funds that will go to nonprofits. And we had a county match of $2 million. So we had a $4 million pool that was just specifically for nonprofit organizations to help them recover from the effects of COVID-19. So we've already had 2 rounds of funding that have happened in 2022, 2023, and now we're into our 3rd round. It's the last round of funding, and there is $250,000 remaining for this grant opportunity. Those organizations that received funding in rounds 1 and 2 are not eligible. So it may seem like there's not a ton of money left from the grant opportunity, but a lot of organizations have already taken advantage of it. So this amount of money is available for the remaining organizations that, for whatever reason, weren't able to or didn't know about it and didn't take advantage of the earlier opportunities. And we have, obviously, we have eligibility requirements that are very specific. We have reporting requirements that are specific for any kind of federal funding relief funds. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But just so that you know, when I start talking about eligibility and I get really down into the weeds, it's a very specific grant, again, because we're using a very particular type of federal funds for this grant. So we have to be really considerate about how we use the funding. So what are the objectives for the fund? Simply, we want to retain nonprofits that we see are core to the creative economy in this region. We want to expand employment opportunities at these nonprofits, so keeping workers, keeping artists and staff employed, and ensuring ongoing access to arts and culture programming throughout Sacramento County. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish with this program. So now to the nitty gritty, what the grant can be used for. Because they're recovery funds, the uses are very specific. If you are awarded, we're going to ask you specifically what you're going to use the funds for, and they should fit within these categories. And the categories are employee salaries, benefits, fees for artists, fees for any kind of contracted services, operations, mortgage payments, rent, utilities, anything that helps you within your operations. You could pay insurance costs. We've heard from the field that insurance costs have really risen during the pandemic. Obviously, marketing is critical to get the word out about the work you do. So certainly you can use it for operating costs. And then if you still have any kind of expenses that have to do with COVID-19 protocols, these grants can be used for that. Just so you know, these are what the grant funds can be used for, and there's going to be a number of things that would be excluded, so the grants couldn't be used for. Some examples would be computers. I often get that question, well, can we buy computer equipment, or we need film or video equipment? Equipment purchases really are excluded in this. Again, really think of this as a recovery program. So buying new equipment is not considered by the federal government part of that recovery that they're looking at. You can't pay for refreshments for events, travel costs. There's a whole laundry list of things that are excluded. But if you stick to these categories here, you'll be okay as far as what your grant is to be used for. So eligibility. So according to national studies, these are the types of organizations in the creative economy that, according to the federal guidelines, are considered to have experienced the most adverse effects from the pandemic, which is why we're really focusing on organizations that must fit one of these categories. So we've included theater companies and dinner theaters, dance companies and musical groups, any other kind of performing arts company, or a community arts organization. And again, it must be a community arts organization or a community cultural organization, not a other kind of service organization. Promoters of performing arts, film, cultural festivals. So if you do a film festival or other kind of cultural festival, that's eligible. And then finally, things like museums, visual arts galleries, historical sites, zoos, and botanical gardens. So again, these would fit in the categories because these are operations where people would have to maintain a facility, would rely on ticket sales, or would rely on people being able to come and experience something on site. And that we know what happened during the pandemic when people couldn't visit these spaces, there was a loss of revenue and a loss of income. So that's why these are considered the eligible categories. You must be a Sacramento County organization only. So that's really important. Your organization's physical location must be in Sacramento County. But if you don't have a permanent physical space, your organization's offices or headquarters must be in the county. And the work that you do should be specific to Sacramento or Sacramento County. So if your work is primarily to tour nationally, and that's really what your goal is, you would probably not be eligible unless you had a very strong local component. Again, this is to help organizations who are really doing work for the county. We're looking at our audiences, we're looking at our community, and we really want to serve that community. So again, think about where you're located. And we know there are organizations where, you perform or you do things, in the county, but perhaps your address is only the address of a board member or the address of a staff member. Just be really conscious that when you're putting an address, because we do need a physical address, that we're sure that the address is in Sacramento County. And if there are any kind of concerns around this is a good thing to reach out because there's always an exception to the rule, but we will have to be really clear about what we're doing. And we just want to make sure that we're funding the right organizations. This is super important. Again, you have to have a current 501c3 nonprofit status. We know that there are other nonprofit designations, but for our purposes, the only eligible nonprofits are going to be 501c3s, and we're going to ask you to show evidence that you're a 501c3. We will check that you're in good standing with state regulatory agencies, and that would be the Department of Justice and Secretary of State. This usually means, have you paid your fees? Have you filed all your paperwork on an annual basis? We know during the pandemic that there were some issues around this. People misplaced paperwork. Things were sent to a place where nobody could access them, and things fell behind. Unfortunately, you know, the city's pretty strict in this one category. And so when you submit your application, you should be in good standing. And we go through the application, I'll show you how to check on that. So in good standing just means when you put in your name or you put in your tax ID, what will pop up on this registry will say current. If it says delinquent or if it says inactive, then that would make you ineligible. You have a couple of weeks before the application is due. In some cases, if you got on there and you filled out the application and you saw you were inactive, if you sort of checked back with the agency and you found out maybe it was just one very simple piece of paperwork, I would just recommend that you be really aggressive in terms of getting that settled before the application deadline. We just have to be very strict around that. And the final piece of eligibility is you must have existed pre-pandemic, which means you were incorporated as a 501c3 before March 1st, 2020. And why is that important? Well, because if you're thinking about organizations that were negatively impacted by the pandemic, they would obviously have to have existed before the pandemic. And we will check with this. We are going to be asking you for your 501c3 letter. Okay, so those are eligibility requirements. There are a few types of organizations that are ineligible. And I just want to, bring these to your attention because you might feel like, well, I sort of fit in one of those other categories that you described, but there are a few categories that we can't fund. And that's just, we have to be very clear about that. And one of them are going to be if you're a unit of government, a school, which would include public, private, college, and university organization. There are a lot of wonderful programs that are embedded in universities, for example. They serve the public, but again, the funded organization is the university. We have to consider those types of organizations for this particular grant ineligible. News media organizations such as public radio or television are ineligible. And I will say that we do hope to have a recovery program that's specific to journalism and arts and culture. So we will be able to at least cover some of those types of organizations with that grant. If you're in art service organizations, there are great art service organizations out there that provide really needed programs and services, but they don't fit in those other categories. So they would not be eligible. And finally, previous ARPA nonprofit recipients, I just hope we were crystal clear, but in early applications, we did see one organization who had already received funding for this program and probably saw the opportunity and didn't realize it was the same opportunity. So if you were funded as an ARPA nonprofit grantee in 2022 or 2023, then you're ineligible because you've already really received these funds before now. In the grant application, and again, we're going to go through it, we're going to ask for evidence and documentation of your impact. We're going to ask you a series of questions. We're going to ask you what your primary mission to produce, promote, or engage in live performance, events, or exhibits. Or is your primary mission to preserve and exhibit objects and sites of historical, cultural, or educational interest? Are you continuing to be impacted, or can you demonstrate continued impact of the pandemic on operations? And you're going to check those boxes. And we're also going to ask if you've been led by or predominantly serve one or more marginalized communities. This information is really important for us, and we encourage everybody to fill these out really carefully. I want you to know that if you are not led by or serve a marginalized community, that does not mean that you're ineligible for funding in any reason. But we are really trying to collect data. We're trying to understand who we're serving. Are we doing a good enough job serving marginalized communities? And the more information that we can put into our database, the more we'll understand how we can do a better job in our community. So I really just encourage you to answer all those questions as thoroughly as possible. So dates and deadlines, pretty straightforward. The application opened on October 2nd. We've done a lot of outreach around it. We're going to continue to do more outreach. Please, if you know anybody who you think might be eligible for this grant application isn't here at the webinar, we can't cover all bases. We're trying to spread our net as widely as possible, but we'd love for people to submit applications. So today, obviously, is the application webinar. The application closes on October 30th. October 30th on the dot. It is not extended. It is, I believe, 11:59. So please try to get it done earlier. Don't wait till 11:59. I've had people submit at, midnight and not understand why they couldn't get into the application. The portal will close at 11:59. And I encourage everybody, don't wait till the last minute, because if there are questions that we have as we're reviewing your application, we would have the opportunity to reach out to you before the application closes. If you wait till the very last minute when it closes, that's going to be difficult for us to do. The grants will be awarded. We will make the recommendations for awards in November and December. When we award funds, we have to bring our recommendations to our Arts Commission. So they have to review our recommendations. We also have to bring it to the county. As I said, this is a city and county grant, which means we have to bring them to their meetings. And it usually takes a couple of months to get on their agendas. But if all goes well, people will get their contracts and start receiving their funds in January 2024. I know it seems like a little bit of a wait, but for us, that's actually pretty quick. The grant awards, one of the first questions we often get is how much can we apply for? In this case, you are not going to be requesting an award amount. The awards are going to be based on a formula, and that formula includes the size of the grant pool, or how many applications we receive. That would be the grant pool, the amount of funding we have, which is $250,000, and the budget size of the applications. The grant allocation is over a 2-year period. And the grants, so for example, if you're receiving a $20,000 grant, in the first year, pretty much close to the first year, you'll get the first $10,000 and then the second $10,000 in the second year. You can't receive more than 45% of your annual budget revenues for a grant. So regardless of the size of the grant pool, if your budget is $100,000, for example, per year, you could not receive more than $45,000 for that grant. And if your budget is $5 million, the grant would still be capped at no more than $75,000 per year. But again, this grant, the amount of funds that we have available is smaller, so we're not really sure that we can even reach that level, but that would be the highest level that you could receive. So then what happens after that? If you complete your application and you meet all your eligibility requirements, you're going to be recommended for an award and notified by email. So this is one of the few applications that, again, if you meet the eligibility requirements, you've submitted everything that you've been asked to submit, all the documentation is correct, you will receive, or you will be recommended for an award. There are steps you have to go through. So you'd have to get through all the contracting processes, but you would be recommended for an award, which is why I'm really encouraging people who are eligible to apply. At that time, we'll ask you to complete a budget. So if you receive $10,000, we'll send you a budget form, and it will have the categories that I had listed before that are eligible categories. And then you'll just tell us what categories you want to spend that money. And we always encourage you to put as much of the funding into the categories that you know you will be spending. So say you're committed to spending a certain amount of money every month on your rent. You know that in all of 2024, 2025, your rent is going to be consistent. That's a really good place to put your money. You don't ever want to put your budget in areas that seem like, well, we might be spending this money, but if we had to cut back, we might not be able to. It just makes it more complicated. So we encourage you to make it as simple as possible for that budget workshop. Excuse me. If I always like to tell people, if you're receiving funds from the city, it's not the same quite as receiving grants from a private source. You will have to fill certain city requirements that may include getting a liability policy and submitting a certificate of insurance. Getting a business operations tax exemption, registering as a vendor with the city of Sacramento, showing proof of your nonprofit status. All of those things are required before you go into contract with the city. Especially the liability insurance certificate needs to go with your contract. And you need to have registered with the BOT office. So there's work that's involved, but know that we have staff that are willing to help you, that are willing to walk you through some of these steps. They're not complicated, but they can get confusing. They're just sort of different bureaucratic steps you have to go through, and we want to make sure that you're successful. So just know that all of those things will be required. So if you apply and are recommended, that'll be your next step. There are going to be federal requirements and obligations with this grant. There are going to be some extra steps you're going to have to take to meet our federal requirements. So for example, you're going to have to register if you're recommended for funding. You'll have to register with a federal system called sam.gov. And you're going to also have to complete very specific reporting requirements, both for the city and for the federal government. And you're going to also have to keep all of your records, copies of invoices, receipts for a number of years, that will all be laid out in the contract. But it's there, again, there are some more obligations with this grant. We usually like to execute the agreement within 60 days. So after you're recommended for funding, we try to move it along as quickly as possible. We hope that it doesn't, take too long. But if you're working with us closely, you can definitely execute the contract certainly within 60 days. And then you would receive, once your contract is executed, it's gone through the procurement process, you would receive the first 50% immediately, and then the remaining 40% at mid-cycle, which is after that first year period, again, with some reporting requirements fulfilled. And then the final 10% you would receive when you finish your report, your final report. And we'll work with you throughout this whole process and make it as easy as we can on you. And lastly, the grant application process. Again, I like to think it's kind of a easier grant application, perhaps, than we've had in the past. It's all done in our portable called Submittables, and we're going to walk you through that in a couple of minutes. We're going to ask some preliminary qualifying questions. So before you get into the meat of the application, you're going to be checking some boxes and answering some questions, just so that you don't continue to fill out the whole application and find out you really were not eligible. We want to, nip that in the bud and make sure that you're not doing extra work that you don't need to do. And the questions are, we're going to ask you to explain the impact of the pandemic on your operations. These are important stories for us, because as we try to continue to get resources for arts organizations, we really need to know the state of the field right now and what kind of impact it's had. It's a powerful story that we can then share with the city and our county partners to hopefully get more support for organizations. We're going to ask you where you do your program. So You'll notice along with the application, there's something else called a location report that you'll download from our website where our guidelines are, and we'll show you that in a minute. It's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. We give you instructions on how to fill it out, but we just want to know where you do your programming in the past couple of years. We're not asking you to include absolutely everything you do, but to give us an idea about the geographic areas where your programs are happening, because then we do map them and we share that information out again with our city council members and with the county so that they know where the activity is, because we can obviously point, there may be a lot of organizations that are headquartered in one particular area of the city or in the county. But then when we realize where you do your programs, we understand that the reach is very broad, and we want to demonstrate that. Excuse me, we'll ask you who you partner with, so what kind of community impact you have. And it's just basically listing the organizations that you may or may not have partnerships. If you don't have a lot of partnerships, again, that's fine, but we want to record it if you do. And then there's some questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to ask you about your staff, your board, and the community that you serve. This is really important information for us. We really believe in the diversity of arts organizations out in our community, but we wanted to be able to demonstrate it with information that we can continue to use. So this is very useful for us. Remember, this is not a scenario where we're eliminating you for funding if your organization maybe doesn't include as much diversity, but we really want to see who you serve, who you are, what your board is composed of. It's just really important information. So I encourage you to be as thorough in that part of the application as possible. And there are very few attachments, and here they are. I mean, just 3 attachments. So we're going to ask for your 501c3 letter. And I want to be really clear, it needs to be your IRS letter. Somebody's already submitted an application, and I think they submitted their franchise tax board letter. We really need to see your letter from the federal government. So we would ask for your organization's 501c3 letter. We're going to ask for a revenue and expense statement for fiscal year 2022. So if you're on a calendar year, that's the calendar year 2022 or the fiscal year. And the acceptable formats, there are 3. If your budget is over $1 million, we request an audited financial statement. Anything below $1 million, we ask for the Form 990 to be submitted for that period of time. And if you have a smaller organization, only under $50,000, so nothing above that, we can accept a revenue and expense report. But again, it needs to include both revenue and expenses. And lastly, the program location report. So those are the only things that you would be uploading with your application. We have some resources for you, and we can probably put them in the chat. Again, as I said, email staff at artsgrant@cityofsacramento.org. If you send it to that email address, any one of us can answer the question and we can get back to you. I can put my email address in the chat. Maybe April can put hers in if you have specific questions of us, but we will try to answer them as quickly as possible. We know there's not much time between now and the deadline. The guidelines are on our website, and there's the link to the guidelines. And the application, you can find it through the guidelines, but it is through submittables. And you're going to be looking for the grant. They'll give you a little list of grants, and we'll show you that in a minute. But you're going to be looking for the 2024 Arts and Cultural Nonprofit Recovery Program. So if you walk away and you take away nothing, I just want a few things to stay on your mind to help you through this process. I really encourage you to read the guidelines, the full guidelines, before applying. Some people go immediately to the application and they think, well, this doesn't look that challenging. I'll just do the application. The guidelines are going to give you that extra bit of information. They're just going to clarify everything. They provide a broader context for the application. So please read the full guidelines, just go through them. They're not terribly long, but it'll give you everything that I've told you here and more. Please check your 501c3 status before submitting. It's not a good idea to not do it and just think I'm going to submit and check the box saying that I did. We're going to be looking at all of these before they go to recommendations. So that's really important. Check your eligibility. I don't think it's too complicated, but you may have certain situations that aren't as clear cut as maybe what I stated, and you're still unsure if you're eligible, but so contact us if you're unsure and we can help you through that. Don't forget to add all the attachments. Again, there are only 3, but make sure that all of them are the correct attachments and you've uploaded them. Please submit the correct financial statements for your budget size. If you don't, we'll have to come back to you and request them. And again, we need to do all of this before the deadline. And finally, don't be overwhelmed. I think it's a short application, but I know, everybody's really busy. You've got a million things on your plates. It may seem more complicated than you hope. But I certainly think that even if you haven't begun it yet, you have plenty of time. And please reach out with questions if you have them. If there's anything in the application that you don't understand or doesn't seem really clear to you, or you think you might be misinterpreting, just reach out with an email and say, hey, I'm just, looking at the application. I want to make sure that I understand what you're looking for. We're not asking for huge, long blocks of text. We give you character counts for each section. That doesn't mean you need to, fill the entire section. If you feel like you've told us what you need to tell us, that's fine. So we really don't want to overburden you with this. So I think that's everything before we go into the application, but let me just check the Q&A. Would a marginalized group be survivors of crime or only based on ethnicity? I think I would be really happy if you decided you were going to explain that to us. If you do say that you serve a marginalized group, use the opportunity to tell us about who you do serve. I think that's really important, and that would be really good information. I mean, often we do look at it based on either demographics or geographic location, but certainly there are other types of marginalized groups we can be open to. For the programming location sheet, what location do we enter when one of our programs was online? That's a really good question. You would say that it was an online program. So make sure that you delineate it was online. But if you know the neighborhoods, there's still an opportunity if you could write online in parentheses and maybe list a couple of the neighborhoods. Do it if you're really sure that's where the neighborhoods are. If you're just sort of guessing because it's students from all over, that's probably not as useful as really knowing where they are. All right, we don't have a physical office address, but our summer program takes place every year at the same place in Sacramento County. Is that okay? Yes, but again, you're gonna have to give us an address because everything is based on an address. So is it the address where you get your mail? Is it the address that you have on your tax letter? It may be a board member's home or a staff member's home, but we will need to have an address. We can't do anything without an address. And I think we are a cultural community organization. We run a summer camp to promote the Japanese American culture. We're open to the public and our students have a performance every year, but the audience is mostly families. They do need to be public programs. This might be a situation where we can even have a conversation about it. I mean, what I'm reading from this question, summer camp to promote Japanese American culture, sounds like you would be eligible, but I just want to make sure that, again, it's open to the public, and that's the primary focus of the work that you do. But we can certainly have a conversation. At this point, I would not discourage you from eligibility, but let's maybe talk offline, or we could take a look. How formal do the revenue expense reports need to be for under $50,000 organizations? they should not be just a Word document. I mean, we really do like for you, if you use QuickBooks or anything like that, I mean, I think they really should look like an official revenue expense report, so that we have some kind of semblance that this is really sort of your legitimate revenue and expenses. So try to give us anything that you would use. What would you show your board of directors? What would you use for another type of grant application? That's what you should try to submit to us. When filling out the application, we were asked for our 2020-990, but our accountant states he will not be finished with our tax filings until November 15th. He said we should be able to use our 2021-990. We can fill out the grant using our and then a November update. Yeah, that is a little bit problematic. James, we should probably again talk offline on that. We are really trying to use 2022 information. Maybe you have some preliminary information that we could use, or a preliminary financial statement with information from the accountant, but we should talk about that. I do know that, I certainly know that auditors and accountants have been behind for the last couple of years in getting this work done. So let's just have a conversation and just make sure that we get the most kind of correct information. So yeah, but again, don't let that discourage you from applying. We'll just decide how we're going to update the information for your grant. Let's see. Do I have any other questions? Let me just see if there's something in the chat that people have. Nope. Okay, that's good. Everybody put it in the Q&A. Yay, that's perfect. Okay, now I am going to stop sharing, and Diana's going to put up the application. So excuse me, when you go to our website, which is where we're going to, send you first, you're going to see a link to apply. There it is. That's the website, Grants for Nonprofit Organizations, apply now. But if you remember what I said, don't forget to download the full guidelines there and make sure you read those. That's also where you're going to find your location report, but the apply now button should take you right to the application. The guidelines, and the guidelines will also tell you how to set up a submittable account. Some of you may already be in the submittable system if you've applied for something with us recently. But if you're not, then you just, you'll get a password for submittable, and you'll be able to apply directly. And that's the grant you're looking for, 2024 Arts and Cultural Nonprofit Recovery Program. And it's going to give you a little information about the guidelines and the initial questions, which are just, obviously the very basic questions about the who, what, where of your organization. Let's see. Okay, and here's the place where you're going to actually have to certify. And we just go through these steps because we just want to make sure that you really have noticed that these are vital, important pieces of the application. I do hold the 501c3 exemption with an Internal Revenue Code. My nonprofit business is in good standing on the California Attorney General's registry, and there's a link to the registry right below it. So you can check right there in the application to make sure. Same thing with the Department of Justice. What I've noticed is more people are compliant with the Secretary of State than the Department of Justice. The city of Sacramento does require both. So just make sure that you're up to date on both. And then we're really asking you, again, this is just to reiterate that you do fit in one of these categories. So we're going to ask you the category that best describes your organization's purpose, and that your organization did exist pre-pandemic. Now you're going to show evidence later, but once you've checked all those boxes, then it's going to allow you into the grant application. And here's where you're going to fill out the entire organization. It's really important that we have your legal name. Very often there are, you know, we know an organization under a different name. Feel free to put that, but your legal name is the one that's going to match what the IRS letter says, and it's going to be the one that's going to follow you through your contract. If you're funded, we will need an address. We're asking for a physical address and a mailing address if it is different. But if you only give us a PO box, we're going to get back to you and say it's not enough. We're going to need at least one physical address that's located in the county. And we're going to want to know the primary contact name, and that's the name that's going to follow this grant throughout. That's the name that would go on the contract. So just differentiate between the grant contact and the organizational contact. It may be the same person, but if it's not, we'd like both. And the primary organizational contact will be the one that the grant contract is sent to. And other just basic information, date organization was formed. We asked for your tax ID number and the fiscal year end. If you've got a web address, we're asking for that. And here's where you're going to upload your IRS determination letter. And remember, it's the IRS letter, not the California Franchise Tax Board letter. And then the financial statements. We're again, specifically, we've asked you, we told you the format that we want you to upload it, and you'll upload it here. And in the space provided, here's where you're just going to answer some specific questions. We're asking you the financial impact of COVID-19. So pick a category. Was it a small impact financially? Again, it probably depends on the size of your organization. Was it really big? We use this information again to study what the impact was of the pandemic on our arts organizations. And we asked you to just provide some brief examples of how it impacted you. You know, staffing costs increased, insurance costs increased, rent increased, or, you know, revenues were lost. Obviously, I'm sure everyone has a story. We asked about your community impact. So we ask about, do you partner with certain types of organizations so that we know, are you having an impact that's even just broader than arts and culture? Doesn't need to be, but if it is, it's interesting and important for us to know. And here's where you're going to upload your program location form. Again, it's really simple. I think we asked you for no more than 20 entries. It doesn't have to be 20. If you do 1 or 2 performances or 1 festival every year, you know, just fill that in. But if you do a lot of things, give us maybe a sampling of different types of work that you do that you would want to share with us, so that we will then map that out and know where things are happening. And then we talk about impacted populations, and here's where we're asking you about communities that you might serve, where if your organization is located and serves a particular community. We ask about the HUD qualified census tract and the Sacramento Promise Zone, and there's information there for you to find out if you do fit within those categories. Excuse me, you can map the address. And then just tell us about who you serve and how they've been impacted by the pandemic. And then I think finally, we ask our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility questions. Again, really important information for us to compile. And the city and all of its grant programming is asking these questions. And we're asking them in a consistent way, because the city website will have a mapping of ARPA funds and where they're going. And we're going to be able to see how we compare with other city funds that are going out, and how the city is doing, where the money is going, and how we're distributing it throughout our community. And that's it. So again, a lot of the questions are checking boxes. A lot of the questions are putting numbers in. And then there are small areas that you're going to be asked for more specific information. So that's all I have. And maybe let's just check one more time if there are any more questions. I'm happy to answer them. Do staff members only include paid staff? I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in this, we ask about paid staff and we ask volunteer staff because we know that many organizations have both. So yeah, we hope to include both. What does accountable to a certain population mean? Yeah, maybe that seems like a confusing word. Hmm. You know, I would sort of say it's a population or a community for which your work tries to represent, if that's a good way of saying it. Does the work we do, so for example, if you were doing a cultural festival, is that work accountable to that cultural community that you might be serving? It might be maybe not the best way that we worded that, but I mean, that's how I would look at it. Okay, well, oops, there more. Oh, no, I think that's everything.
Can I just add something real quick, Melissa?
Yep,
Just make sure that when you do sign up in Submittable, that you want to use an
yes,
email address that you check regularly. We had people in the past use a different email inside of the application, which when we are corresponding with you through Submittable, it actually goes to the email that you signed up with, not necessarily the one that you included in your application.
thank you very much. That's really important. I just sent an email through Submittable to someone today who has submitted an application and included the wrong 501c3 letter. So I was able to write to them, say, I'm opening your application for editing. Please take this one out and please put the correct one in. Once that's done, we'll close it up. Again, this is all being done because we are in advance of the deadline. After the deadline, we can't really do that. So again, which is why I encourage you to either do it early or be super thorough as you're going through this application and making sure that you've checked it a couple of times and you've understood all of the questions. But I did send that email through Submittable. So if you get if you get an email from Submittable, you want to be checking that all the time because that's going to give you the information that you need. Once you submit the application, and don't forget to press submit, you can't go in and change it. Now, if there's something that you realize or something that later on you feel like you've done wrong, and oh my gosh, and the deadline's still a week away, you can certainly send us an email, contact us and say, hey, can I get back in to my application? I just need to make some kind of a change, or I need to add something, and we should be able to do that. Remember that we're not checking things on weekends, so we're Monday through Friday. So again, don't wait till the weekend, and if you need something done, really try to get everything you can get done during the periods of time when staff is here, which is sort of a 8:30 to 5 Monday through Friday. But we will be very responsive to you if you ask us questions about this grant. And I'm going to put my email address in the chat because April already did hers. And well, hopefully that was as self-explanatory as possible. Again, let me reiterate, if you've sat through this webinar and you realize, oh, this grant isn't for me, I thought it might be, but I'm probably not eligible. Check back on our website. Please sign up for our newsletter. That's the first thing you should do if you have never done it, because that's where you're going to find all of the information that's needed for any grants or professional development or opportunities. We have calls to artists. We have workshops for artists, which are usually free of charge. We have film and media grants that are on an ongoing basis, and we hope to have new opportunities in, if not for the end of this year, sometime next year. And you'll be the first to know if you sign up for our newsletter. So please keep checking back if this isn't the right grant for you. But if it is, I hope you apply. And thanks for showing up today.
It looks like we have a couple of more questions if you wanted to try and answer those.
I will. Okay. Oh, I asked a question about our 990 in my community. I did answer it. James, just contact me offline and we'll talk about it, and we'll figure out the best way to get it done. I think I did say that I know that accountants are a bit behind on some of the work this year, but we really are trying to get consistent year figures. So let's talk about that before you submit. In regards to partners, should we only list Sacramento-based partners? I would say Sacramento County for the purpose of this grant. That's really what's important to us, whatever's happening in Sacramento County. We asked the DOJ to update our status from delinquent to active, submitted the requested payment and forms. The DOJ indicated they have a backlog and processing time can be 60 to 90 days. So there is a possibility they might not be able to do this. Can we apply hoping that the update could be finalized shortly after the due date? And yeah, I mean, the applications are going to be reviewed within, and we have to move very quickly with these grants. So they're going to be reviewed within the week after the applications are due. So there's really not a lot of leeway we have. What I'm going to suggest, and I've suggested it to other people, and it has worked, is to get yourself down to the DOJ, bring everything that you need, and show up on their doorstep and tell them that you have a grant application due and you really need to get this, finalized. If they can give you a screenshot, if they can give you any kind of formal indication that they're changing your status to current, we could use that, but we would need to see something in writing from the DOJ. And I know they've been telling people 60 to 90 days, and I'm sure that's the case, but often if you actually walk in the door, it will help. So for this, I would encourage you to do that. Okay, I think that's it. For any other questions, please reach out to either myself, April, or Arts at cityofsacramento.org, and we'll be happy to answer it. I hope you all apply if you can, and thanks for coming today. And I don't think I sneezed once during this, so that's good news too. Bye.